Howdy folks, Sauber here. Welcome back to the channel. So today I am going to show you something a little bit different. This is War Conflict. You've probably heard of it. It's basically a mobile version of War Thunder. Okay, kind of. Granted, you don't get to play the actual vehicles that you see in War Thunder. This isn't World of Tanks Blitz. You don't get to drive around in some fancy, low resolution vehicles that are pixelated and whatnot. Nope, this is a little bit different, and oh my. I got 20 containers. Let's open some up. Okay, cool, BT7. Camo. On second thought, this is probably gonna take a while. Yeah, how do I get out of this? Oh, and you also have a little tutorial instructor who eerily looks like my ex. Yeah. Can we skip this, please? No, skip. I want to skip it. All right, let's go into a battle now. Oh, I was bringing back bad memories. Okay, so you can see here, I'm attacking someone else's base. You can attack other people's bases, and if you win, you can earn silver and medals. Kind of like prestige points, only a little different. And in addition, if you lose, you just lose prestige points. Thankfully, you don't lose any silver, but the vehicles you put into production, even if they survive the battle, they're a total loss. That's the only thing I really do not like about this game. But all in all, I really like it. What's more is there's also a campaign mode, which I will show later on, and it's kind of like a story mode, where you advance, you're kind of playing as the Western Allies, so to speak, but you can use any vehicle you have unlocked, which is rather interesting. And then, of course, there's my personal favorite, the duels, where you can go 1v1 against another player and put your dueling skills to the test. Use defense cards to protect yourself or use as offense, and you can also, duel them to capture their bases and see who can win within 3 minutes time. All in all, I really would have recommended this game back in its day. What do I mean by that? Well, sadly, you will never, ever get to play this game. Or if you've played it before, like me, you will never get to play this game again. Why? Well, War Conflict is a dead game. So, sometime on August 28th, 2019, at about 7:25 p.m., I'm assuming it's UTC, the War Conflict developers made this announcement. This decision was difficult for us, but we informed that the story we created is coming to an end. We announced the closure of the game War Conflict. It is hard for us to say goodbye to you, but we could no longer develop and support the project. Thanks to everyone who was with us. Starting August 29th, payments in the game will be disabled. September 25th is the last day when the game servers will work, after which we will turn them off forever. Yeah, feels bad, man. So, yeah, after 3 years of development, they just decided for whatever reason to close War Conflict. Such a shame. But anyway, let's go ahead and dig into the history of War Conflict. War Conflict was launched in, I believe, the autumn of 2016. Ironically, it would seem that it was almost 3 years to the month, I don't know about the day, but to the month, from when they opened it to when they closed it. So by the time you see this video, the game will no longer be playable. I know, it feels bad, man. It wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't that good of a game either. But it was a ton of fun to play, without a doubt. Now, you might find this interesting, but when it first came out, and I heard about it, I initially did not have a lot of interest in it right away. Well, mainly because I don't know if it's because I grew up in the early 2000s and I was accustomed to playing video games either on the computer at a desk or on the couch via a console and TV, that when I found out about mobile games, I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool, but then, well, not all of them were that great. Keep in mind that this was long before Plants vs. Zombies or Angry Birds or even Candy Crush were around, so whatever mobile games you had, some of them were okay, like Pac-Man. I did like Pac-Man, but others, like, I don't know, they just weren't really that good. And you would naturally assume, well, Salber, it was because phones back in the late 2000s, you know, when smartphones were being introduced, were not as great as they are today. Well, that may be true, but to each his own, but for me, I like some... I don't know, it's hard to explain. I have a specific taste for games, and mobile games just don't really offer the same experience as do console games or PC games. And don't get me wrong, there are some good ones like Plants vs. Zombies, Angry Birds, War Conflict, or, well, when it was still around, that sort of thing. But yeah, so at some point in November of last year, I got curious and thought, I wonder if you could play some mobile games on the PC, because I generally don't like to have games on my phone, mainly because I can't really do such a tiny screen, and I have big thumbs and big fingers and whatnot, so it's kind of hard to do it on such a tiny screen, to be honest. So I thought, I wonder if I could play them on a PC. So I asked some friends around, and one of them, RaptorB2, as we'll refer to him, that's his YouTuber name. He hasn't uploaded in a while, but he has some cool videos. I definitely recommend you check him out. But anyway, he recommended BlueStacks, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I'll be honest, I was like, what the heck is BlueStacks? I honestly thought it was some kind of shader add-on where you could customize the shaders of your game. But, oh, sorry. My dog is having a nervous breakdown. Oh my gosh. Stop. Anyhow, so I got BlueStacks, and I thought, what games should I try? I tried Massive War Effect Online, or whatever it's called. It was one of the games that Fly advertised a while back, or not advertised, but was sponsored to advertise, you could say. And so I thought I'd try that. It was a little fun, but this is the main thing that gets to me with some mobile games. Now, granted, not all mobile games are like this, but they're essentially worse than PC games in this regard, and that is, they can be a bit of pay to win. Now, I didn't really have that big of a problem with Massive War Effect Online, mainly because I had a mouse and keyboard to my advantage, but for the most part, it didn't really last long. The missions were not really that exciting. Now, granted, some people may like that sort of style gameplay, but me, I didn't really like it that much. So I looked for other games, Angry Birds, Plants vs. Zombies. Those were fun, and then I was like, wait a minute. What about War Conflict? I had remembered it from a while back, but I had never played it. So I thought, I really should give it a try. So I downloaded War Conflict. Now I will admit, it was a bit of a learning curve, but all in all, I really started to enjoy it. You could build your own bases, customize the configurations, set up the defense cards, whatnot. It was pretty fun. And one of the distinct things I could remember when I was trying to set up my base is that I was wondering to myself, how do you set up these bases? How does it work? I honestly thought that it was just for cosmetic looks, but then when I started to duel other bases, I was like, yeah, this is pretty fun. I will acknowledge, I did not realize that when I was attacking these bases, that these belong to actual players. I did not realize that. But then I started to notice quickly when I started getting notifications that people have attacked your base and you've lost. I was like, well, how am I losing? I started to buy a little bit of gold, not too much, just a little, to get some new defense cards. And then when I found out even those were not working, I was like, is this pay to win, or how does this work? It was then... Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. The one thing that really triggered me about War Conflict, and I hate it to this day, And I'm surprised that in the 3 years they had been in development up until their final days, they never had a wiki. Sure, they had a simple tutorial, but it didn't really tell you, oh, you should set up your base like this. No, you shouldn't set up your base like that. You should use this card. You should use that card. This card does this. This card does that. That sort of thing. But, yeah. Oh, and to deviate a little, I did skip the advertisements because it's like, there's no point in showing those. So if you see a, where it goes dark and then comes back again, it's because I'm skipping an advertisement. But anyway, so as I learned through painstaking trial and error, you could say, I ended up figuring out how to set up a really good base. And one of the things I really liked was... What was I going to say? There's something else, sorry. You could set it up in a way where you could have air support defense cards, where if someone tries to capture a base, then they would get bombarded with aircraft. And then you also set up 2 missile bases, to which your ground units generally would go for first, and then it would try to go for the regular tank bases. What's more is that, for a long while, that base design worked. Because the way it was set up was where, as you progressed and upgraded some of your buildings, one of your buildings, I forget what it is called, or was called, but I think it was like your communication center. You could upgrade not only the defense cards, but over time, enable for more defense cards to be used on your bases. It starts off where you can only use 1 card per base, then 2, then 3, and then finally 4. And you can also upgrade, or could also upgrade your cards to make them more powerful. I think that was the thing I liked the most, was setting up defense cards and combining cards, figuring out which combinations worked best for you. But yeah, so people would generally go for the second base, or the third base rather, going to the left. It's kind of hard to describe. They would capture it with the best units they had available, which generally were like Shermans and Panthers, and occasionally Panzer IIs. And they would capture it, and then they would utterly get wrecked by the air support units. And then, if they tried to capture the second base, they would again get bombarded with the units, which generally by that time they would be dwindled to like very small numbers. Like, on average, I believe the company of recruits tier was, with a combined total of units, it would be about 150, maybe 200 strong. But by the time the air support units were done with them, it would get down to like 30 or 40. Which by then, my units would still have 200 health left, and for the most part, unless the enemy had missiles, yes, you could use missiles, then by then they would be dwindled to the point where your units could capture them easy. Now keep in mind, you did not control your units when you were your base was being attacked. To prevent it from being unfair, well, depending on how you look at it, they could only attack your base if you were offline. Alternatively, you could get a shield, but that turned out to be expensive, and if you had a really good base to where people would constantly try to attack and they would lose, then you would get prestige points or medals. But if you had a shield, then you wouldn't get those medals. That sort of thing. So it was really balancing act to decide, do I want a shield, or do I want people to be welcome to attack my base, which in turn, they would be the loser if you had a really good base setup, and you would reap the rewards. So, yeah, it was a balancing act. But all in all, I really did like that setup. I'll never forget one day, sometime in January, I logged in to find that 20 people, that's right, I think 21 to be exact, 21 players had attacked my base over the course of 2 days, because I did take a day off, and only one of them succeeded in capturing my base. It was crazy. But I really did like War Conflict for its time. I'm really upset that they ended up canceling it. Or not canceling it, but shutting it down. And I'm really curious as to why they shut it down. I did inquire via a support ticket, because I didn't know at the time when I made the ticket that the game had been shut down, or was going to be shut down. I thought it was just a server error, because going back a little, we need to go back a little bit in time for context. So, starting around June, of this year, I had noticed that I was experiencing some connectivity issues, as well as a vehicle production bug. Now, keep in mind that when War Conflict was around, you did not report bugs or make suggestions the way you would for War Conflict. There were no suggestion mods, like me, for War Conflict. There were no technical moderators for War Conflict. It was quite laxed, really. You could make a super basic suggestion or a super basic bug report, and they would look into it. And the crazy thing is, they only had one guy. That's right, one guy, a community manager, looking into all of that. And eventually, now, I don't know what his circumstances were, but I think it's safe to assume that, be it if this was in the company or just IRL, things weren't going well for him, and he wasn't able to keep track of all the feedback, suggestions, bug reports, etc. So I had made some bug reports, and, well, let me rephrase that. I had made one bug report, and it was the only one he ever responded to, which, by the way, was never fixed. I was trying to examine one of my bases as they were being upgraded, and I tapped just too close to the speed up upgrade with gold option, and I basically wasted like 400 gold, which I believe was like, I think $5 worth for the most part, on the upgrade. Which was a total waste, considering that the upgrade would have been completed by the time I woke up the next day. Because I was I was playing late at night, and I was getting ready to go to bed. So, if I would have just let it alone, I would have been able to get the upgrade for free. So, I made the bug report and asked, is there a way I can get my gold back? And he was really nice. He's like, noted, very sorry for the error on our part. You could tell that English was his second language. But alas, he was nice enough to, or I say he, but I mean the team, were nice enough to refund my gold. And yeah, that was a really nice experience. They were very helpful. But then later, as I made subsequent bug reports and suggestions, for some reason, they didn't get looked at. And I got a really game-breaking bug where you would try to produce a vehicle for an assault. By this time, I had used up all my premium vehicles, which, to be honest, were like pay-to-win vehicles. Because at top tier, the maximum strength you can have your vehicles is 200 health per squad. But with these elite vehicles, they could be 250 for the gold piercings, and up to 275, it used to be 300, 275 for the Victory IS-2s, which were rare premium vehicles that were given out as a prize. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember how you acquired them, but I guess it doesn't really matter now, considering that War Conflict sadly no longer exists. So, by the time I had used up those gold vehicles and the victory vehicles, I started producing the Tigers more. And they did work out for a while, until this game-breaking bug started occurring sometime in late June and early July. And that was, if you tried to produce a vehicle, guess what? It wouldn't do anything. And if you try, but it would spend your silver. You would tap it again, it would spend more silver. You tap it again, you spill more silver. And there was spill more silver? Oh my goodness. Spend more silver, and you wouldn't get the vehicle. If you spam tapped it, the game would crash, reload, and then you would get those vehicles, but the major problem was you would get overcharged. For example, it costed about 15,000 silver to produce one Tiger Squad. So if you produced 5, which was, give me a second. Trying to think off the top of my head. Oh yeah, duh. 75,000 silver. If you experienced that bug, then you would get overcharged and you would lose as much as 100,000 silver. That was no good. But a little exploit you could do to speed up that production with gold instead of spending, I think it was like 10 gold to speed up the production of all the vehicles, you only needed to spend 2 gold. That's it, just 2 gold. So you saved in gold because it took time to produce those vehicles, as much as 30 minutes, to produce a full squad of 5 tanks. So it's like, ain't nobody got time for that. You would spend the gold, and then you would be ready to go to the next assault. Now, you didn't need to produce vehicles for the arenas. You were given those from the get-go at random, which was fun, but I think the annoying part was that you knew what aircraft you could get, you knew what tanks you could get just by moving them from one base to the next, but you didn't know what missiles you got. Because there were 3 different kinds of missiles. There was the standard missile, the EMP missile, and I like to call it the nuclear missile. Now, the way the standard missile worked, it basically, you would launch it onto an enemy's base, or if you were not careful, your own base, which I always thought was kind of stupid, and it would just basically dwindle down the units that were on that base and weaken it. It wouldn't necessarily weaken the base, like if it's a fortified base or a super fortified base, you would have to use the artillery barrage defense card, which, as always, you would have to use your defense cards wisely, because you had power-ups that you could use, and at top tier you had up to 50, but at starting you had, I think, like 5? I don't remember the exact number. But then, another issue that arose, to deviate a little with the cards, is that sometimes, like as it showed there, I had my fortification defense card, but it didn't work. And thus this guy, or at least his AI, were able to defeat my units. Even though I had 700 HP more than he did. It was kind of stupid, but stuff like that happened. And sometimes it even happened in your favor. For example, if your base was being defended and someone tried to use it with their strong amount of vehicles, your AI would prove to provide a better defense than it would probably logically seem. It was quite a paradox when you think, if you remember War Conflict. It was a little strange the way those doctrines and defense cards work, because sometimes they were not always black and white. Sometimes a card would work right, and in other times they wouldn't. I never fully understood it, to be honest. It was a bit confusing. But anyway, going back to the missiles, if you had the EMP missile, which was one of my personal favorites to use, or sorry, it wasn't the EMP, it was the nuclear missile. I got ahead of myself. The EMP missile is, if you launched it onto an enemy's base, then not only could they not produce any vehicles, for a brief time, any vehicle that was in there could not be moved. On top of that, if there were any units nearby, be it yours or the enemy's, then they would also be frozen in position, allowing an enemy vehicle or artillery to attack them. Now, the missile itself would not weaken the base, nor would it destroy any units, it would just freeze them in place. And thus, if there was artillery, or if there were other enemy vehicles nearby, then it would enable them to attack the vehicles that are just frozen in position. It was quite effective when you think about it. And then finally, we have what I like to call the nuclear missile, and how that worked was, if there were very few, if any, units left on an enemy's base, then it would automatically make it neutral. This was useful if, for example, if you were in a duel. For example, there was this one map, it probably was showcased earlier, I'm not sure, but the way it was set up is you had your regular base, your tank base, and then you also had a missile base. If you had the nuclear base, you could launch 2 missiles. One would be against the enemy's base, and the other one would be the base that they may try to rush towards. And then they would try to do the same to you, and you would have to rush out before it would get your base. And if they couldn't get to the other base in time, and their original base was destroyed, then guess what? Boom! You automatically won the match. That was just so much fun to do. And speaking of duels, one of the most interesting bugs that you could use to troll the other players, which I will admit, guilty as charged, I was guilty of doing this. Sometimes the timer, well, like 9 times out of 10, sometimes the timer would work, sometimes it wouldn't, but The way it was supposed to work was that each mission or duel was to last 3 minutes, whereas the assault missions would last 3.5 minutes. The assault mission timers always worked as intended, for whatever reason why. But the duel ones just 9 times out of 10 didn't work. It would hit to 0 and the match would keep on going. What I did was... this is just absolutely hilarious. So, if you would beat back a player, you could beat them back to their last base, pile on some units at their base, and they just cannot escape. They couldn't defeat your units because you had more units than they did, and they couldn't barely leave their own base because if they did, they could not defeat your own base. So, literally, just out of curiosity, I just left that match running for 30 minutes. I came back, and the guy was still there, trying. And I thought, and there was never any voice chat or text chat, so I was just left to wonder, what was this guy doing? He could have easily decided to leave the match and concede. You had that option. If you didn't want to keep playing, you could surrender easy. It wasn't that hard. I don't know. I never really understood how that worked, but sometimes I just did it for the fun of it, and I made it my own personal role after that to make it last no longer than 10 minutes. Because sometimes I would do just for fun, I would stockpile units, and then retreat back to a other part of the map, let the guy capture all but one base, my own, and then within rapid succession I would just send out a bunch of units, and just capture the remainder of his bases. It was quite a bit of fun to mess around with, and now that I think about it, I think I'll edit this part of the video later on to show you what I'm talking about. This will be towards the end of the video. But I really did have a fun time with the duels. The duels were my all-time favorite. I mean, sure, the assaults gave you silver, and they gave you medals and fuel. I will be honest, you didn't really need the fuel as much as you did with the silver. But it was a ton of fun. So the next thing I wanted to talk about in regards to war conflict, aside from the bugs, was the progression through the bases. You know, like through Company of Recruits, Company of Professionals, and Company of Mercenaries. I think there was going to be a fourth company of something. I think it was Company of Legends, but for whatever reason, that never got implemented. I never really understood why. But one of the interesting things I found out, when I got into Company of Mercenaries, was that unlike the previous companies, where you would use medals to progress. I mean, once you would progress from, like, let's say, Company of Recruits to Company of Heroes, Company of Professionals, and then Company of Professionals to Company of Mercenaries, it would be based on how many bases you succeeded in capturing. It was regardless of how many medals you won. Whereas before, to progress from, like, let's say, a Company of Recruits 1 to Company of Recruits 2, you had to acquire a certain amount of medals. And one problem with that was that, and they later fixed this down the road, I remember this even when I was still playing it, was that, and I don't know how big of a problem this is with Clash Royale. I haven't played it all that much. I only played it a little because Raptor plays it, and I played it with him a few times, is that people that are of high rank would intentionally get into a match, concede, and it would lower their level all the way down to level 1, and then they would just wreck the newbies with their elite top tier units. It was kind of ridiculous. And I guess something similar was happening in War Conflict. People would surrender their medals to get downgraded, and then they would just wreck the newbies and just gain silver and other rewards. I guess they fixed this because no matter how crappy you played, you would not get demoted. In other words, you would never get... your level would not decrease. Like, for example, if you were Company of Professionals 3 and you were doing crappy, you wouldn't get downgraded to Company of Professionals 2, then Company of Professionals 1, and so on. You would stay at your rank regardless. which was kind of helpful because then that would remove the possibility of cheating by intentionally downgrading to where you would be playing up against no one but the newbies. But yeah. So anyway, once I got into... because... Sorry, I keep stuttering my words. I apologize for that. So when you would get into, like, for example, Company of Professionals 1, Company of Professionals 2, most of the players you would face were of your equal level. But once you got into Company of Mercenaries, all bets were off. Because some players you would encounter, or at least in regards to their bases, like, for example, even if you stopped playing War Conflict, you still had your bases how they were set up back in the day. So, literally there was this one base. Now, you had rules to how you would set up a bases. All bases had to be connected by a road. The only exception were air bases. But if your starting base, you had to have 2 roads connecting. Or was it 3? I can't remember. I think it was 3. Yeah, it was 3. Hence, if you had 2 or less... No, 2 or less, then your map would be deemed illegal, your artillery would stop working, your defense cards would stop working, and the enemy could attack your base right from the get-go. So, it was not uncommon for me to, on occasion, get some maps where it said, you can attack this enemy's base from the start because their map setup is illegal. And it was like, wow, it's crazy. Oh, and to deviate a little, yeah, as you can see here, now, it looked like I was going to lose, but now it's just a big old hostile takeover. Just stockpile your units, and, yeah, you can just absolutely wreck them. It's funny, one of my friends was watching me do this, and he's like, that guy's probably thinking, how's he doing that? He's cheating! And I had to explain, no, not cheating, just playing a broken game and using its broken mechanics to my good advantage. And one little funny thing to know about this map setup is the way it's set up, because the sole red base you see to the right is the starting point for the enemy, and the top left is my starting point, and we each get our own air base. It was never really a good idea to set it that way from the start, because if they were able to, you could weaken their airbase or wait for them to launch all their planes out and then launch all your planes into theirs, capture it, and then they can't get it back. Which made it especially ironic because there was one occasion I did that, but he somehow managed to capture all my tank bases and I couldn't recover. But ironically, it ended up working out in my favor because he couldn't capture my tank bases, nor could he capture the missile bases. Or no, I said that wrong. He couldn't capture any of my air bases using his tanks, and he couldn't use the tanks to capture the missile bases. So he was stuck and couldn't do anything. And I couldn't do much because I didn't have enough... I just couldn't master up enough planes to capture the base because the planes I had did not convert to tanks when capturing a tank base, so I was stuck too. So I thought, I'm gonna go eat dinner. I come back and it says, victory! The enemy surrendered! And I was like, ha! It was crazy how that ended up working out. But it was never really a good map design from the start, because I would exploit that every moment I could get an opportunity to do so. Wait for my opponent to use up all his planes on that base, and then just capture it myself, and he could not get it back. And then I could use those planes to capture the missile bases, which in turn, the missiles could be used to weaken his tank bases. It was quite something, I gotta say. So, my final words on War Conflict is I am very disappointed that they ended up shutting it down. I mean, I know nothing lasts forever, but you would have thought that War Conflict would have lasted a little longer than it did. I mean, sure, 3 years is a decent run, but I would have appreciated if it lasted much longer. Probably never even got shut down in the first place. And, oh yeah, I don't think I finished my story with the support ticket, because I inquired, because I couldn't connect, and it turns out just not all accounts were able to connect, but some could. Henceforth, while I couldn't connect, some could. And so I inquired, what's the deal? Is it something on my end? Is there something wrong with my account, or what? I'd like to know. And then I also expressed my honesty. I said, I'm really disappointed with the constant irregularities and unreliability and bugs that War Conflict is facing. And I've never had any issues playing it with it on BlueStacks up until the vehicle production bugs in July and so forth. And they said, oh yeah, I also said, is it possible that this game is getting shut down? If so, I will understand, but I would like to know what's the deal. And they said, regretfully, yes, we are shutting down the project. And I was like, okay, thanks for letting me know. And then I asked them, would it be possible to explain why? And they said, they gave me a very, very interesting yet honest response. And that is, they basically said that while they had no official reasoning why the program was being shut down, you know, war conflict, but they said that the developers chose to shut down the project because they could no longer continue working on the project. Kind of like of what it said on the Facebook post, which logically leads to some speculation. And before I mention that, let's pay respects to war conflict. Okay. Now, I was going to sign off here and have you enjoy this final battle, but I decided to just go ahead and mention, you know, my final words on War Conflict. I'll definitely miss War Conflict. It was a good game for its time, and I will be honest, I hope that they'll either make something to replace it in its place, or, I don't know how true this is, but hopefully this will mean that they will dedicate more development resources to War Thunder, and War Thunder could become even better. We'll just have to wait and see how things go from then on out. But I'm really surprised to think that it could be the issue of money or a lack of developers as to why War Conflict ended up getting shut down. It's a big shame, and who knows, maybe someday someone will buy the rights to it and remake it. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But all in all, I'm hopeful that maybe this will mean that they'll dedicate more development resources to War Thunder. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. But anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're enjoying the video so far as usual. And I do plan on making a new intro video, you know, with the Phantom and the MiG-21. Just shaping things up a little. I'm not sure if I'll find a new song just yet, but for sure I want to update the intro video itself. Give it a new fresh look. And in addition to that, one change I forgot to mention not too long ago, I'm now uploading in 1080p 30 instead of 1080p 60. Since I'm able to upload stuff faster and it's just easier to work with. Upload stuff faster and process stuff faster. So yeah. So anyway, so long, War Conflict. We will miss you. Press F to pay respects. And anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Stay safe. And peace out.